Hello there, and welcome to the very first episode of Politics Unwrapped with me, Toby Mesme. We're going to be bringing this out in the evening, UK time, every single day, and see how we get on. If there's demand for it, we'll keep it going. It's basically a briefer where we're going to take you through all the trends in terms of public opinion and in terms of developments in politics in the UK, in the US especially, both those countries, mainly the UK, and around the world as well. At points, we're going to be looking a lot at polling and public opinion, but we're also just going to be digesting the news, giving you what you need to know with the specific slant of looking at it through the lens of politics rather than the lens of news. And we're also going to let that branch off into everything related to politics, and in as objective a manner as I possibly can. I am going to deliver you my analysis of the events of the day. I've been studying and following politics for several years now, and I think I can offer some insights, particularly if you don't know much about politics or you want to understand what's going on underneath the headlines. I think this show, this will be going out streaming on YouTube, also going up on YouTube as a podcast, will be something you will enjoy. First off today, Rishi and Volodymyr, Sunak and Zelensky. A surprise visit to the United Kingdom by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He does this quite a lot. Originally, it was always secret visits, but now it's some of them are well known in advance. Some of them are still secret. And out of this meeting, the UK has said it will send hundreds of air defence missiles and armed drones to Ukraine on top of the Storm Shadow cruise missiles announced last week. So what this means fundamentally is the UK is going further than any other country in providing weapons with the potential to tip the battlefield in Ukraine's favour. The key thing here is, by no means are we giving the most, by no means are we committing the most financially. America is blowing Europe out of the water in that regard, in terms of supporting Ukraine. However, in terms of the severity of what we're sending, and Volodymyr Zelensky is coming here as part of his tour of various Western allies. He's been to Germany, shoring up support, trying to patch over relations after Germany was viewed as more soft towards Russia relative to other European countries. He's been to France, thank them for their support. But he's coming here at a time where, frankly, Rishi Sunak could do with the boost of being photographed, as you see on the screen here, with Volodymyr Zelensky, and sort of keeping up the sort of bromance image. That he's had that rapport with Boris Johnson before Rishi Sunak. He's now developing that rapport with Rishi Sunak. UK government policy to Ukraine has been basically identical under the three prime ministers we've had over the last year. It's been a turbulent time. But basically, in terms of the severity of what we're sending, it's the most. We are sending things that other countries aren't willing to send. We have not agreed to send fighter jets. And this is the interesting thing. So we are sending Storm Shadow cruise missiles, which can be used to destroy Russia's positions on occupied Ukrainian territory. If Ukraine can destroy Russia's command centres, logistics hubs and ammunition depots in occupied territory, then it may prove impossible for Moscow to continue resupplying its frontline troops in places. So what we're doing here is we are sending things that reach further than a lot of other Western countries are willing to send. Russia has singled the UK out at various points, basically implicitly threatening the UK with some kind of military action against them. Generally, that's bluster from Putin, but still. There has been a light shone on the UK because of what we're willing to send. Some of it's symbolic, but it's still pretty meaningful, particularly considering the the Washington Post, actually, don't get those two mixed up. They wouldn't want to be mixed up, cited the recently leaked Pentagon documents that have been leaked from America and various sort of embarrassing things for the American government, stating that Zelensky planned to use various bits of weaponry to attack bits of Russia, basically dial up the pressure on Putin by attacking bits of Russia. This has been denied. This would be a severe escalation. This would call into question Western policy, whether the interests of Ukraine and the interests of the West are different in terms of Ukraine wanting to scare Russia, but the West not wanting to get into a hot war with Russia, which if Western arms were being used regularly to strike Russia itself, we'd be in pretty risky territory there. Volodymyr Zelensky has denied this. You hear that here. He says, we are not attacking Russian territory. We are liberating our lawful land. We are not interested in this. We do not have time, excess power, or weapons for this. We are concentrated on preparing our counter-offensive actions to deoccupy according to international law and our constitution purely our Ukrainian universally recognized territory. And there's no reason to disbelieve that at this stage. By the way, if you want to get in touch throughout this stream, you can get in touch in the chat if you have any questions about these kind of things. This was Rishi Sunak talking about jets. This is the other thing in contention. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy really wants NATO to send F-16 jets. The Ukrainian Air Force has trained its pilots on F-16s, which the RAF do not use, but such training takes months. The issue is this would be seen as a provocation by Russia, and various Western countries are reluctant, sort of dragging their feet on this. This was Sunak and Zelensky speaking on the issue of jets.
But I think it's important for the Kremlin to also know that we're not going away. Right? We are here for the long term. We remain steadfast in wanting to defend Ukraine, not just now to reclaim its rightful territory, but also to ensure that Ukraine has the means to defend itself into the future as well.
Today we spoke about the jets, very important topic for us, because we can't control the sky, you know it. So I think you know everything deeply, because we're real partners. Rishi knows all the details, what's going on our battlefield. Thank you very much. And we want to create this jets coalition, and I'm very positive with it. We spoke about it, and I see that in the closest time you will hear some, I think, very important decisions, but we have to work a little bit more on it.
So he's pushing very hard for it. A lot of Western countries are reluctant. We'll see what happens. We haven't actually had many bellicose threats from Russia recently. I suspect if this is ramped up further, you probably will see Russia making, the implicit threat is always some sort of nuclear response. Which, it depends who you speak to. That's either bluster or there is a certain red line that if crossed, Russia would deploy nuclear weapons. We don't know. We're certainly not at that stage at the moment, and we'll see what happens. There is basically political unanimity in the UK in terms of public opinion and in terms of the political parties behind this tough approach to Ukraine. And in the broad scheme of things, it won't make a huge difference because we're quite a small country. And what we give is comparatively small, but big symbolic moves. If we do something, it breaks the taboo. Other countries might join in. Worth noting, Rishi Sunak's approach is more aggressive, for instance, than Joe Biden's approach at the moment. Now, over to Turkey. Massive election in Turkey. This is huge. The reason it is huge is particularly because he's facing a challenger, and the Turkish President Erdogan is a populist, and he's a populist who has control of much of the media in Turkey. This is a huge country. It's in NATO. Everything from the country's approach to Russia, to the country's prosperity going forward, to civil liberties in the country, hang on this election. Erdogan's power has been weakened recently simply because of the economic troubles in the wake of a massive earthquake as well. Now, his opponent was leading in the polls. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu was leading in the polls heading into this. If neither candidate got over 50% of the votes, they would go to a runoff. We're heading to a runoff, but here's the thing. Erdogan has 49.5% of the vote. Kemal has 44.8%. Round it up, 44.9% of the vote. Second round will go ahead on the 28th of May. Erdogan is now the clear favourite. It looked like he might be about to lose, and a lot of Western countries were really keen for him to lose. But frankly, there was a third-party candidate. A lot of their supporters will go to Erdogan, so Erdogan is basically a shoo-in to win another term in office, and the implications for Turkey are quite fundamental in terms of civil liberties and in terms of his party securing its grip further on the country. A lot of people were talking about this election, sort of the last chance. You've got the media stacked against you, but the election technically will be fair, right? The votes will be counted fairly. He could be defeated. We don't know what state things will be in after another term in office, but we will see. But this was a shock for a lot of people, and Erdogan has outperformed his polling and he's clung on. Although this is an underperformance relative to previous elections that he's stood in, it's worth remembering that. This is worse for Erdogan than previous elections, but he's in. And in probably the most challenging circumstances he's faced. Now, this is very important. The National Conservatism Conference. It's another splinter group set up by disgruntled members of the Conservative Party. These disgruntled members of the Conservative Party are not happy with Rishi Sunak. They are people that would have allied themselves with Boris Johnson or Liz Truss, but their ideology is hard to unpack because they seem to want to go further to the right on economics, but also go further to the right on culture. So they want more war on woke, more, if you like, sort of anti-trans stuff, but they also want more free market policies. And it's a little bit of a paradox, but one of the most important things coming out of this conference is Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob Rees-Mogg has been talking about the Conservatives introducing voter ID, and in an extraordinary way, someone who was in government when this was implemented has said that the voter ID policy was designed to suppress votes and that it's backfired. But the key admission here is someone who was in government admitting that the Conservatives are trying to suppress votes. Have a listen to this.
Parties that try and gerrymander end up finding that their clever scheme comes back to bite them, as, dare I say, we found by insisting on voter ID for elections. And we found that the people who didn't have ID were elderly, and they by and large voted Conservative. So we made it hard for our own voters.
So that's very, very significant, huge. We'll see how that develops. That is, obviously the government denies this. Huge admission. Shocking admission, really. Now, the conference itself, a lot of interesting things have been said. It's very... basically, the key thing about this is Rishi Sunak isn't in danger of being deposed. The majority of the Conservative Parliamentary Party knows this. However, what we're seeing now, saw this at the sort of Conservative Democratic organisation, sort of the Bring Back Boris organisation over the weekend. We're seeing this here now. After the local elections, it's open season again on Rishi Sunak. The honeymoon is over. The right of the party are basically setting themselves up because they know when Rishi Sunak loses the next election, the party membership will want to go further to the right. And they are jockeying basically for the Conservative. Instead of saving the Conservative Party in government, they're jockeying for how to position the Conservative Party for their faction once the Conservatives are in opposition. I'm going to give you Conservative MP Danny Kruger. He says this. Intelligentsia, the globalised elite, whose localities are to everyone and no one, let us not retreat to the southeast, to the managerial class. The British government was pushed around until 2019. Stood up to our own party, and our own deluded refuseniks, and because Boris Johnson showed courage, the EU took him seriously. We crashed through the ring of bullies. In 2019, the whole country voted to get Brexit done. And sort of rallying against what he's calling progressive liberalism and sort of sinister semi-Marxist forces taking over society. Sort of standard rhetoric we've heard from these kind of people. Basically a blue-collar pitch. But in a very, very deeply culture war-centric way. Not much on energy bills. Not much on the cost of living. The other thing to bear in mind here, very fundamentally, is to hold on to most of their seats, the Conservative Party are going to have to hold on to what is being called here intelligentsia, the globalised elite, whose localities are to everyone and no one, the southeast, the managerial class. These are the areas that if Rishi Sunak were to lose these seats to the Liberal Democrats, same way he did in the local elections, you're looking at 100 Tory seats left. You know, you're looking at a landslide defeat. That's the Tory base. Coalitions are realigning, but right now, the Conservatives have much more seats in the southeast than they do in the north. You know, in sort of red wall type areas. That's, 50, 60, 70 seats. At most, those seats might go. But those seats can go and you can still have a healthy opposition party. If you lose the south as well, and you lose sort of Tory shire areas, those places are going away. But if you drive those away at once, when the red wall already looks like a lost cause, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. Now, that's not an argument for the long-term future of conservatism, just in terms of damage limitation heading into 2024. For want of a better word, sort of spitting on the southeast is not a good idea for the Conservative Party. Put it that way. Some more stuff being said. We'll give you some clips of what was going on at this conference because it's really fascinating hearing what these people are saying. Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, absolutely one of the top 2 or 3 potential contenders for the leadership, after the next election. And a very, very staggeringly unpopular politician, possibly the least popular Conservative politician at the moment, save Liz Truss, not because of her views on immigration, because of her general public image as a more extreme politician, talking about mass migration here and basically going onto the culture war terrain that didn't work well for the Conservatives in the local elections.
It's not xenophobic to say that mass and rapid migration is unsustainable in terms of housing supply, public services, or community relations. Nor is it bigoted to say that we have too many asylum seekers in this country for whom we have insufficient accommodation. That absorbing more and more people means building more and more homes is another one of those unfashionable facts that the Open Borders Brigade would say means we're starting a culture war. It's not racist for anyone, ethnic minority or otherwise, to want to control our borders.
Now, some of what Suella Braverman says, a decent chunk of the public would agree with. But here's the thing. A, this isn't the number one priority for the public. B, making it into a sort of civilizational clash narrative is very political. It is absolutely in line with what we've seen from sort of populist far-right politicians around the world. It's also not the lens through which the public sees immigration. The public sees immigration, even if they want it reduced, they see it through the lens of competence and they see it through the lens of fairness. These sort of grand narratives are not where the public are, especially, at least not in a majority. But also, the most damaging thing about this conference isn't what's being said, and it isn't the fact that there is a conference. The most damaging thing is, A, it makes the Conservatives look disunited. That damages Rishi Sunak. Unless he has total unity in the party, it's very hard to project competence heading into 2024 when the party brand is already battered and the public are exhausted and Labour is looking united on the surface at the moment. But also, it means a chunk of the party has given up on winning. They may not say this, they have given up on winning in 2024, this chunk of the party. They are interested in jockeying for position. That is damaging for Rishi Sunak, even if a majority of Conservative MPs don't agree with what's being said here, aren't at this conference. Jacob Rees-Mogg on net zero, massively out of touch with the British public on this, but have a listen.
We must look at whether net zero by 2050 is feasible. It is no good willing the end before having calculated the economic cost of the means. Ultimately, nobody gets elected on making voters cold and poor.
Now, heading into 2024, coming out of the election, if, and it is an if, I say when or if, it is an if, okay? You've got a high likelihood of a Labour government of some kind. The odds of a Conservative majority, which is what they need to cling on, are low. However, it's plausible. It's possible. Everything goes the government's way from now to, say, October 2024. Add in some kind of event that leads to a rally around the flag effect, or some severely incompetent Labour campaign that massively damages the view of them. Yeah, the Conservatives could cling on with a small majority. However, if that doesn't happen, the overwhelming majority likelihood, which is something we really need to think about now, the three main candidates for Conservative leadership, in my opinion, are probably Suella Braverman, Kemi Badenoch, and maybe Penny Mordaunt. And outside Penny Mordaunt, you've got Kemi Badenoch, who is interesting, but not a very well-honed political player yet. You've got Suella Braverman, who will appeal massively to the Conservative Party membership, but will struggle to appeal to the Conservative Party at large simply because her brand of politics is deeply on the right and isn't really interested in the fundamental issues people are facing. Some bits of the public may agree with them on immigration. They may not completely disagree with everything they say about culture. But the point is, this is not the direction. The public wants a projection of competence, and it wants people to tackle energy bills and tackle the cost of living. That isn't the focus of these speeches. That isn't the focus of these politicians, and they're already unpopular. You poll Suella Braverman, it's massively unfavourable approval ratings for her as a person, for her as a politician. Now, the other thing is, there is not enough about bread and butter issues. All of this is culture war stuff. They tried culture war stuff in the local elections. There's reams of data indicating the culture war stuff, wherever people stand on it, is not igniting votes. We're not America, and it doesn't look like between now and 2024, it will be, the next general election is not going to be won or lost on trans issues. It's not going to be won or lost on trans rights. It's not going to be won or lost on stop the boats. Even if those things are important and they are factors, particularly things like stop the boats, that has more permeation in the public consciousness, people don't like the way the government's talking about it, and people are kind of bored of the noise, and the cultural stuff just sounds like more noise. So it's less whether people agree with it or not, it's more, it's just not cutting through. And it didn't cut through in the locals, and it doesn't look like it's going to cut through going forward. And Rishi Sunak particularly isn't a particularly effective salesman for it anyway. Now, over to Labour, Keir Starmer. There have been some interesting things going out from Labour, basically saying they're considering giving 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds the vote, or EU citizens that are settled here, so sort of migrants, EU migrants, that are settled permanently in the UK, aren't full citizens, giving them the vote. Be a big expansion of the franchise. Now, let's hear the Labour leader on both these issues, because there's been a bit of flip-flopping. There often is. With Labour on sort of hot-button positions. And it is one of those issues where it sounds like they may consider taking a principled stand when these two policies don't have majority support. Plurality opposes both of them, but they're not going to move, politics massively. If it's something Labour really want to do, they can push for it. And it's the first time I've seen Labour not run away from something that might not be 100% popular. Have a listen. This is Nick Ferrari doing Call Keir, talking to Keir Starmer about the 16-year-olds policy.
Extending the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. Again, you're thinking behind that, Sir Keir, because critics would say they can't smoke, they can't drink. I don't think they can get married without mum and dad's permission, but they can vote.
Yeah, they can have babies, they can work, they can join the army. So there are big things you can do at 16 and 17. And again, it's not such an outlandish idea. In Wales, it already happens. In Scotland, it already happens. So again, we're looking at voting. There's a big policy, because the Labour Party's got lots of rules. There are ways to make policy. There's a big policy-making forum, and these are some of the ideas that are going into the mix, but they're not policy.
It's really interesting hearing these thoughts from Keir Starmer, because it is a big. It's a big deal what Labour are doing on constitutional reform. Constitutional reform is something I'm really interested in seeing what the next Labour government does. Because the Conservatives have been in too long. They're not really wanting to do massive changes to the constitutional settlement. And Labour are basically saying there isn't enough money to do many things on the economy. So the only area where you could see Labour be radical would be on constitutional reform. And there have been noises. But there were noises with Tony Blair and it didn't happen. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens. This is Keir Starmer on the EU citizens, settled EU citizens policy.
If someone has been here, say, 10, 20, 30 years, contributing to this economy, part of our community, they ought to be able to vote. Let me bring it alive. I've obviously knocked on a lot of doors in the last few years, and you go to doors sometimes in general election, and you're met with someone who says, look, I'm an EU citizen. I've been living here for 30 years. I'm married to a Brit. My kids were raised and brought up here. They're now working in the UK. I'm even working in lots of community projects, etc. But I can't vote. And I think that feels wrong, and something ought to be done about. When someone has, let's just take someone who's been here for 30 years, has literally put down their roots here, as I say, married to a Brit, their kids are here. This is their country, this is where they live, this is where they contribute. I think it's very hard to say, well, you should really be voting back in your country of origin where you haven't been living for 30 years. That actually just doesn't pass the common sense test for me.
It's very interesting. I think that's a very strong argument. I think you could move the dial of public opinion on an issue like that in terms of an issue of fairness. People are quite open-minded in the UK on sort of fairness. The British electorate likes things to be viewed as fair. I think you could make a very strong fairness argument on something like that. Finally, Joe Biden. Joe Biden is really keen not to cancel his trip next week to the Group of Seven summit in Japan. There's lots of things he wants to do on the international stage. And there's visits he wants to do to Japan, Papua New Guinea, Australia. But the possibility of a default on the federal debt, the sort of standoff between him and Kevin McCarthy, the Republican speaker, are dominating talk in Washington. He doesn't want to cancel, and it basically looks like it's coming down to the meeting. The meeting's on, is it Monday or I think it's Tuesday, another meeting, one was postponed, another meeting between Kevin McCarthy and Biden. If there's not progress, it looks like he'll be staying back. But this was, who is this who said this? It was someone from the Pentagon or the national security people said, it would certainly, from a national security perspective, have a detrimental effect in terms of cancelling it, saying, certainly in terms of our reputation and standing around the world, cancelling sends a horrible message to nations like Russia and China, who would love nothing more than to be able to say, see, the United States is not a reliable partner. The United States is not a stable leader of peace and security around the world. Biden's really keen to get this wrapped up. We don't know what he's willing to concede in terms of spending cuts. We don't know what Republicans are willing to give on. It's one of those situations where you don't know if it's slightly dicey in terms of a default, or if it's absolutely hair-raising and we're heading for a car crash and we're going to default. We don't know which it is. It is a globally significant event if there is a default. It's so extreme, it feels to me like the markets would basically bully Biden and McCarthy into doing something before we got to that point. But there's room for error, and it's really significant, and it's not getting the coverage it needs in the UK and in Europe, I don't think, because this is really significant, and this will rebound on our economies as well if it were to happen. Not to mention the catastrophic effect it would have domestically, and sort of how the blame would be doled out by the public. Would Biden be blamed? Would the Republicans be blamed? How would it affect the 2024 election? Very significant questions. Because on paper, it'd be a massive hit to an already struggling Biden in terms of re-election. But if the Republicans, if they're able to pin a narrative that the Republicans crashed the economy, well, maybe that turns it on its head. Who knows? That's the first ever edition of Politics Unwrapped, taking you through UK politics first and foremost, but also global politics and US politics and sort of public opinion and everything through a political lens. Thank you so much for listening. There will be a podcast version of this. You may be listening to that up right here on YouTube. There will be a stream of the next edition at 10 p.m. for the Tuesday edition, Tuesday the 16th. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you soon.